You ever hear a story that makes you stop what you're doing and you just sit there stuck in it? Not because it's dramatic or over the top, but because something about it feels off in a way your brain can't shake. Well, that's this story. I came in from a guy who didn't even want to tell it at first. I had to pull it out of him piece by piece, and even then, it felt like he was holding back. All I knew going in was that it involved his kid, a drive home from school, and something they saw on the road. But what really got me, the part that stopped me cold, was what happened after. Something in their house. Something that shouldn't have been there. If you're the type of person who thinks everything has an explanation, good. Hold on to that. You're going to need it. I hadn't thought about that night in a long time. Funny how your mind does that. Boxes up the stuff that rattles you the most and shoves it into some dusty back corner until something yanks it out again. That's what happened to me this week. My wife went through something recently that scared her bad, and the second she told me about it, it was like a trap door opened in my memory. All the details of that night from 2019 came rushing back, clear as day. And now I can't stop seeing it. It was just a normal weekday. My son had stayed late after school for football at Central Bucks East. We were both beat. He was messing with his phone, and I was doing that end-of-day highway trance, half-focused, counting down the stoplights till we got home. Then my son shouted, "Dad, stop the car!" I slammed the brakes so hard we both jerked forward. I was about to ask what he saw when I saw it too. There was something crossing the road, but it wasn't walking. It wasn't running either. It was gliding, low to the ground, smooth, like it was skating on air. Its body didn't bounce or sway. It just moved, fast and straight. And right before it slipped into the other lane, it turned and looked at us. That's when my stomach dropped. The eyes were the first thing that hit me. Huge, way too big for the size of its head. And they glowed, not reflected. Glowed, like taillights in the fog, deep red with something alive behind them. The kind of eyes that don't blink, don't look at you, they look into you. Its skin was pale, almost gray-blue, like it hadn't seen daylight in years. No hair, no clothes, just long bony limbs. And the knees, they bent the wrong way, like a bird, but not like any bird that should be that size. It was about 4 feet tall but upright, sort of child-sized if the child had been stretched in the wrong places and rearranged by someone who didn't know how people are supposed to look. It didn't make a sound, not when it crossed the road, not when it leapt into the field on the other side, like it weighed nothing. And then it was gone. We just sat there. No radio, no words. My son looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. "Did you see that?" I asked. He nodded real slow. "What was that? Was it a dog? An alien?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know what it was. Still don't. That night, I couldn't shake it. I went back out with a flashlight and the dogs, kept them in the car. I just wanted to see something, a print, a track, anything to tell me it was real. But there was nothing, no marks, no trail, just tall, wet grass and a kind of silence that felt too heavy, like the whole field was holding its breath. Eventually, I let it fade, buried it, until this week. My wife's had sleep paralysis since she was a kid. It's scary, sure, but she knows the drill. She sees shapes, hears stuff, can't move. It's a brain glitch. But this time, she said it was different. She said she was lying on her side, trying to fall asleep, when she slipped into that half-dream state. Nothing new, but when she opened her eyes, she saw legs. 2 bare legs, small, thin, standing inches from her face on the carpet, right at the edge of the bed. No shoes, skin pale like it had been kept in a freezer. It was wearing something white, shirt maybe, or some kind of nightgown, but she couldn't see past the knees, and she said, and this shook me, something told her not to look up. She didn't hear it. She felt it. Like if she saw its face, something permanent would break. So she did what she always tries, reached out to touch it, try to prove it wasn't real. She touched its leg. She said it was solid, ice cold, like stone, not soft, not flesh. And the second she made contact, her body locked up. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All she could do was make this tiny strangled sound, like a whimper. That's what woke me. I turned and saw her wide-eyed, mouth open but frozen. I shook her until she snapped out of it. She was soaked with sweat, shaking, couldn't sit up. Then she told me, and I didn't even try to rationalize it, because I remembered those legs. There's something out there, not a ghost, not some myth, something real. It moves quiet. It doesn't like being seen, but every once in a while it slips, and when it does, it shows just enough to make sure you don't forget. It doesn't need to chase you. It doesn't need to speak. All it has to do is remind you it's still around, waiting. And the scariest part? I don't think it ever left. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, and I'm still a bit shaken up just putting the words down. I've been wandering the trails around Mount Hood and up through the North Cascades since before my knees started creaking. A good 50 years of hiking and climbing around the Pacific Northwest. Give or take. Well, this particular incident happened not too long ago. August 14th, 2021 to be exact, while I was on the Timberline Trail near Mount Hood. I mention the date distinctly because that's my granddaughter's birthday, and I remember complaining to myself that I had to sneak in a quick hike before we celebrated. Anyway, I headed out around 6 a.m. from government camp, parked not far from Timberline Lodge, the old historic ski lodge I've adored since I was a kid, and told myself I'd just do a short loop. In all my years out here, I've run into just about every sort of wildlife you can imagine. Black bears rummaging near the trail, mountain goats perched on near vertical crags, and once even a cougar shadowing me along a ridgeline for a half-mile or so. But I swear on my old broad-brimmed hat that I have never felt anything like this. It started with this low moan, so faint I almost wrote it off as the wind gusting through the evergreens. We had a bit of weather moving in, so I brushed it off for a moment and kept on going. But then that moan turned into the strangest throaty howl, not a typical wolf sound. We don't tend to have pure wolves around that part of the mountain. Occasionally you'll hear about them popping up in the Mount Hood National Forest, but it's rare. This was different, like it had a weird resonance, almost echoing twice. I remember standing still for a second, looking around, thinking maybe I was just hearing things. Then I caught a glimpse of something moving through the tree line maybe 30 yards ahead, so close I could practically smell the pungent damp odor. It was upright, that much I'm sure of. It wasn't some bear rearing up on its hind legs. The shoulders were too broad and it looked too lean, almost like a big wolf but standing on two legs. I blinked a couple times, thinking I'd lost my bearings. My eyes aren't what they used to be in old age, and sometimes the morning sun can play tricks through the trees. It was just a shape initially, dark, tall, bulky at the top, tapering down. I took a step forward, and that's when this thing turned around. Not fully, but I saw the outline of a canine-like snout or muzzle. Long arms, or maybe they were four limbs if it was crouching. The fur looked black or dark gray, though in that half-light under the branches, it was hard to say precisely. But it definitely wasn't a bear. It was bigger than any black bear I've come across in that region, and I've encountered a fair share, sometimes rummaging near the parking lots or scrounging around campsites. It seemed to vanish behind a thick cluster of pines with an uncanny swiftness, right when I thought about calling out. I didn't, though. Something about that entire energy made my skin prickle, like that oppressive tension you get when a big predator's nearby. If it had been a standard wild animal, I might have whistled or shouted, but I had this overwhelming sense that I should just hold my breath and keep quiet. My hearing's not too good. My left ear rings from an old chainsaw accident years ago, but there was another shorter growl or bark from behind the same clump of trees. That's when I got spooked. I'm not one to run from wildlife, because that's how you end up dinner, but I couldn't help but move back, step by step, never taking my eyes off that part of the timberline. I realized my heart was pounding so hard it made me dizzy. I remember fumbling with my hiking poles, like I was going to use them for defense. Ridiculous. Those carbon trekking poles wouldn't do a darn thing if whatever that creature was decided to come after me. My mind started racing. I thought, maybe it's some feral dog, and I'm just spooking myself because I've heard too many old stories. But no, it was too tall, too hunched in an odd way, practically towering, for lack of a better word. I don't want to toss around the term werewolf, but that's all I could think of in that moment. This is embarrassing to admit, but after a few beats, I hurried further back down the trail at a pace that would make an Olympian proud. Didn't exactly run. I've still got sense enough not to sprint in unknown territory, but it was the fastest retreat I've ever done. The entire way back to Timberline Lodge, I kept looking over my shoulder. My knees were screaming from the downhill speed, but honestly, the adrenaline must have been pumping because the pain didn't register until later that evening. Halfway down, I started second-guessing everything. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was just a big black bear with a weird gait, maybe standing to sniff the air, but the shape of the head and that weird echoing howl, none of that matched any bear encounter I've ever had. When I finally left the woods and got to my pickup, I just sat there with the engine running like a fool for a good 10 minutes, scanning the tree line, telling myself I'd eventually see something. Part of me wondered if I should drive down to Zigzag Ranger Station or let the folks at the lodge know, but I pictured the rangers' faces if I tried to explain how I'd seen some enormous wolfman creature lurking near the trail. They'd probably shrug and say I was short on sleep or something else. I still don't know how to process it. I've slept under the stars for decades without any fear of the night sounds. This felt different. Thought about it non-stop for days, especially since I'm usually so comfortable in that environment. I checked a few wildlife reference guides. Nothing matched. Then I started poking around online and found some references to dogman sightings in various areas. I'd heard about Bigfoot stories and random cryptid stuff, but I never gave it serious attention. The mention of a dogman always struck me as more rumor than anything. But the descriptions people share in their sightings, some mention that strange howling, that tall, upright canine shape. Heck, it matched a disturbing amount of what I witnessed. It also struck me how quickly it vanished into the timber. That was what truly shook me. Bears, cougars, they all move fast in their own ways, but not with that fluidity. It almost felt unnatural. And once it was gone, the forest got so quiet, like everything else was holding its breath. I'm talking total silence. No jays squawking, no chipmunks skittering, just this thick hush, like the woods themselves were scared to make a sound. I kept thinking about whether I should mention it to my hiking buddies. They're mostly older folks like me, some veterans from my old mountaineering club in Hood River, a few from a birdwatching group up near Bellingham. But I know how it sounds, and I don't want everyone thinking I've finally gone senile. Then I watched a video last week on your YouTube channel that made me realize maybe there's a place people talk about these things without shame. So I'm taking the plunge here. There's another odd detail. Later that day, I was at home icing my knees, flipping through local stations. Around the weather segment, the newscaster briefly mentioned that folks in the government camp area had called in reporting some large animal noises the previous evening. The station didn't dwell on it, just a wildlife in the area, remind hikers to stay alert type of message. It occurred to me that maybe I wasn't the only one who heard that unearthly howl. Of course, I can't confirm it was the same day or the same noise, but the timing gave me a chill. I can't help but replay the moment in my mind, how it turned its head. I couldn't see its eyes in detail, but I had the distinct impression it was looking at me with some level of intelligence, not animal curiosity, like it was calculating what to do next. That's still the part that makes the hair on my arms stand on end when I think about it. I remind myself that if it had wanted to cause me harm, it had plenty of opportunity. But I get no comfort in that thought. It just has me more unsettled. These days, I'm not the type to go chasing cryptid lore, but I'm not going out alone in that area again anytime soon. My next planned hike is going to be with two buddies on a different trail, maybe somewhere in the Alpine Lakes wilderness, or even closer to home where the terrain is more open. Part of me feels like if it's out there, better not to cross paths again until I can wrap my head around it properly. Yet at the same time, I'm too old and stubborn to just give up the mountains, so I guess I've got to come to terms with it somehow. I keep hearing that howl in the back of my mind whenever I step out for a quick walk around the neighborhood at night, and a dark shape on the corner of my eye will make my heart skip a beat. Worst part is, I'm sure if I describe what I saw to most folks, they'll say I was just tired or spooked by a black bear. But I know what a bear looks like, and that was no bear. I'm hoping by sending this to you, it might reach some folks who've been around that same area. Maybe they've had similar run-ins, or maybe it will just be another piece of the puzzle for whatever's lurking out there in the forest. I still can't quite believe I'm typing these words, but there it is. Sometimes I wake up thinking it was just a nightmare, until I remember the way that strange, guttural sound vibrated in my chest. That was real as the rocky switchbacks, the smell of pine needles, and my shaky knees. I suppose I'll keep my eyes and ears open if I'm back up that way, and I'll definitely be more prepared, though I'm not entirely sure how you prepare for something like that. Maybe just keep your wits about you and trust your gut. I've been looking after a ranch just outside Rachel, Nevada, right off Route 375, you know, that long stretch people call the extraterrestrial highway, for the last 5 months while the owners are spending time in Arizona. Normally I deal with feeding the horses, watering the property lines, stuff like that. It's a quiet place, though we do get the occasional adventurous tourists, especially on the weekends, hoping to glimpse something unusual in the skies. For the most part, it's all desert landscape, the kind that forces you to appreciate the vastness of it all, or you go nuts from isolation. But about 3 weeks back, I remember it was the night after the Leonid meteor shower peaked, so that would place it around November 18th. Something seriously odd caught my attention. I should say, I've heard plenty of stories around here about bright lights and mysterious sightings ever since I moved in. I brushed it off as local color for a while. It's practically normal in this part of Nevada. The day after the shower, I went out before sunrise to adjust the irrigation system near the east paddock. Usually I start at the main barn, check the lines, then head down along the fence line. That morning, as I walked about 200 yards from the main structures, I noticed these strange circular patterns on the ground. They were blackened, almost like the dirt and scrub had been torched. At first, I thought maybe a small brush fire had sparked up, but the circles were too clean, too perfectly outlined, about 12 feet in diameter each, and there were 3 of them nearly in a straight line. I crouched down to touch the edges of one of them, and that's when I realized the ground itself wasn't just scorched. It was almost glassy, like the sand had melted. I'd never seen that outside of pictures from desert test sites or something. It didn't look like a normal burn from a ranch fire or lightning strike. Then, off to one side, I noticed this peculiar, slimy residue. It was a milky, pale green sludge, somewhat translucent, and definitely not something I've encountered before. It didn't have a putrid smell, but it had a faint chemical tang, like old battery acid or antifreeze. I was so freaked out, I didn't think to grab any photographs right away. I just sort of poked at it with the tip of my boot and immediately regretted it, thinking maybe it'd corrode the leather. I ended up heading back to the barn to grab my phone, a pair of nitrile gloves, and a task light, because it was still pretty dark out. The sun wasn't fully up. When I came back, I tried to snap some pictures and even recorded a short video clip, but the phone didn't really capture the detail well in the early light. I took a few steps around the scorched spots, and the slime, there's no better word for it, seemed to be seeping into the dirt in a few places, almost like it was sinking in or evaporating. I got spooked that it might be toxic. This ranch isn't exactly flush with chemical safety gear, so all I could do was collect a tiny sample in a mason jar. I sealed it tight, then took it into the tack shed and stuck it on a high shelf. I've been meaning to get it tested, but I'm not sure who around here would do that without asking a million questions. I should explain a bit about the layout. The property is about 5 miles from the main cluster of houses in Rachel, and we have a decent vantage point over the desert flats. Sometimes at night, you see lights moving in the distance. It's no secret that Nellis Air Force Range isn't far, and there's a lot of hush-hush military presence around these parts. On nights when I'm having trouble sleeping, I'll brew a pot of coffee, sit outside, and watch the sky. It never fails. I catch at least 1 or 2 bizarre light maneuvers, stuff you wouldn't expect from normal aircraft. I've even heard what might be sonic booms echoing from the north. But these circles of scorched earth and that oily slime pushed me past the comfortable boundary of just weird lights in the desert. There's a local rumor that the government does a lot more than just test planes out here. I met an old-timer at the Alamo gas station who claimed he used to do maintenance runs on the hush-hush flight lines near the Tonopah test range. He said they'd catch glimpses of craft that looked nothing like standard jets. You have to take those stories with a grain of salt, but this is the first time I've felt there's something more than just stories going on. Why would those scorched circles appear basically overnight? And that slime, it doesn't match anything I've seen with normal desert flora or fauna. No cactus sap or anything like that. I even thought about the possibility of some weird fungus or algae bloom. But again, this is bone-dry territory, and fungus doesn't typically create a chemical like film. I kept telling myself I'd email you right away, but time got away from me. Everything's been hectic because one of the water pumps started failing, and I had to drive into Ely for parts. On top of that, I've been hearing this faint buzzing noise every once in a while at night, almost like distant power lines crackling, but I can't locate where it's coming from. It's not near the main ranch house, though. Sometimes it seems to come from that same direction where I found the scorch marks, over by a few scattered Joshua trees. I'd walk out there at night, but I'm not ashamed to admit it. I get a bit jumpy walking around with no one else around. It's one thing in daylight, but the desert can be unnerving in the dark when you're alone. A side note, I took one of the owner's horses out for a midday ride a few days after I discovered the circles. She absolutely refused to go near that area. Ears were pinned back, and she started snorting like she smelled a predator. This isn't a skittish animal either. She's been well trained, used to coyotes and the usual desert wildlife, but she wanted no part of that spot. That reaction's been stuck in my mind because it tells me maybe there's more to it than just my imagination. Animals sense things we sometimes overlook. One more bizarre detail. A piece of the barbed wire fence near the circles was warped. It looked like the metal had partially melted or been twisted in a heat shock. The fence posts themselves were just old wooden stakes, and they were charred on the side facing those marks. The other side of the fence was normal. I've never encountered that kind of damage from thunderstorms, and it didn't match any normal fire pattern. It was so localized. That alone made me wonder if something landed and then took off quickly, or maybe hovered, I don't know. I might sound paranoid, but that's the feeling it gave me, an intense direct heat source from above. I should mention I've noticed a couple unmarked SUVs driving on the county roads nearby over the past week, which might be nothing. People pass through occasionally, but they parked about a half-mile down from the ranch gate for a good 10 minutes one evening, and then I saw them peel off heading south toward Highway 93. It could be random trespassers, but it felt out of place, especially considering everything else going on. I didn't want to approach them, because the last thing I need is trouble with who knows what kind of folks. Since I found that goop, there's been no additional signs of fresh residue or new scorch patterns. But the existing circles are still there, faintly visible, although some of the blackened dirt is getting scattered by the desert winds. I've left them mostly undisturbed, aside from the sample I collected, hoping that if something else strange happens, I can compare changes in the area. I still can't figure out what that slime was, and every time I think about it, I'm reminded of how out of my depth I am. Part of me wonders if there's a group out here studying this stuff quietly, waiting for sightings, analyzing evidence. I'm just a caretaker, so it's not like I'm going to solve the UFO mystery, but I sure would like some answers about what's going on at this ranch. I plan to head into Vegas for a weekend to blow off steam, but something keeps me around. It's like I'm half expecting to see a repeat incident. To confirm I'm not imagining all of this. The dreams I've been having lately don't help either. I've woken up a few times feeling like there's a pulsing sound just beyond the window. Could be the desert wind playing tricks on my mind, but there's an underlying sense of presence that's hard to shake. I'm not sure what to do next. The owners don't even know yet, because I don't want to freak them out, and I also don't want to come off as unhinged. I'll probably mention it to them in passing when they return, in case they have any insight about strange happenings from before I took over as caretaker. For now, I'm just keeping an eye on the property, especially that scorched area. If there's anything else I notice, I'll collect more samples and document it better. Maybe even borrow a friend's high-quality camera to stay prepared. I was out past Globe, Arizona, a few miles west on Highway 60, near the tail end of the Telegraph fire, around mid-July 2021. I remember it was right after the big containment push, when we thought we had most of the hot spots under control. I'm a volunteer wildfire scout, which basically means I help monitor areas and relay info about possible flare-ups or new threats. Not the most glamorous gig, lots of looking out over charred landscapes and sniffing for smoke, but it's something I've been doing for a few seasons now. The nights can get pretty quiet out there in the high desert, except for the hiss and crackle of smoldering brush and the odd distant coyote. So if anything unusual happens, it sure stands out. I was parked in a dusty turnout close to where the highway curves around some rocky hills, east of Superior, but before you hit the really winding part of the road toward Miami. For some reason, the wind had picked up a bit that evening. Felt strange on my face, like the kind of dryness that's not just normal desert air, but something electric, if that makes sense. I hadn't noticed any lightning though. Around 9 or 9:30 p.m., I got this uneasy feeling, like the hair on my arms was standing up, almost as if a storm wanted to roll in but never quite formed. I started scanning the ridgelines, because unchecked embers can flare up quickly when the wind changes. I saw nothing out of the ordinary at first, just the faint glow of some stumps still burning out, plus the reflection of the moon on charred ground. Then, off to the south side of the ridge, out of nowhere, I caught movement in the sky. It wasn't choppers. Usually, you can hear the rotor wash and see the typical flashing red or white lights that come standard on firefighting and National Guard aircraft. This thing came in so silently that, for a second, I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks in the smoky haze. It was shaped sort of like an elongated triangle or wedge, maybe with a slight bulge in the middle, and it had a faint silverish glow from its underside. I almost convinced myself it was a reflection of the moon on a cloud, but clouds don't zip back and forth like that. I remember rummaging in the back seat for my binoculars, cursing at how I'd stowed them under a pile of gear, and by the time I got them out, this craft had drifted closer to the southwestern edge of the burn scar. The movement was smooth, like it was gliding on some invisible track. I've seen plenty of experimental aircraft near Luke Air Force Base in the past, but this didn't look or act anything like them. No sound, no contrails, no typical wing shape. When I finally got the binoculars up, I swear it looked like it had some weird louvered vents or openings along the sides, kind of like vents on a car's hood but bigger. Right then, I noticed small objects dropping from it, like bits of twinkling metal fluttering downward. It took my brain a moment to register what was happening, because it almost looked like confetti at first. But confetti in the middle of a wildfire? That's obviously not something you see. Plus, they had a shine to them. These pieces seemed to catch the glow of the moon, and maybe the reflection from the persistent flames below. I couldn't tell if they were hot or cold, just that they were, without a doubt, metallic. It reminded me of the way tinsel kind of floats in the air during the holidays, but bigger, like shards of thin sheet metal. I tried to switch on the radio to see if anyone else was noticing the same phenomenon, like if another scout or firefighter would be hollering about some weird aircraft overhead, but I couldn't get a clear signal. Everything was static-laced. It was the weirdest thing. Usually, we have designated frequencies that stay pretty clear, unless the terrain is blocking the signal. I thought maybe the smoke was interfering, or my handheld had some battery issue, but I just replaced the batteries that afternoon. Static, nothing but a faint hiss. So I was stuck alone, just watching. The craft started moving even lower, almost as if it was deliberately scouting the area, or maybe scanning the ground. That's when I realized the metallic pieces it dropped were actually raining down on an area that was still smoldering. I worried it might spark up a new blaze if those fragments were hot, or if there was some chemical reaction. I was about to start up my truck to try to get a better vantage from a side road when it angled upward in a motion that was so abrupt, it's a wonder it didn't produce any sonic boom. It tilted, paused almost, and darted off toward the southeast, toward the Dripping Springs Mountains if I had to guess, based on the direction. I drove around for maybe an hour, going up and down old service roads that the firefighters used, thinking maybe I'd see a crater or a weird burn pattern from where those fragments landed. The terrain was still hot, some areas roped off due to hazard trees, the ones that can collapse after a fire. I wasn't exactly authorized to go trudging in, but curiosity got the best of me, so I parked and walked with my Nomex gear on. Normally you can see bits of ash swirling around, but this was different. These were small reflective slivers scattered among the burned brush. They were about the size of a dime, maybe smaller, but I couldn't pick any up safely because everything was still scorching hot in places. I did shine my flashlight on them though, and they definitely looked like they had a dull sheen on one side and a smooth mirror-like quality on the other. The strangest part is they were too uniform in shape, like they'd been cut or manufactured, not random melted bits of metal from a burned-out vehicle or structure. There were no buildings out there, no cars that had burned in that specific spot. This was part of the national forest. I kept telling myself I should grab one once it cooled, but something about it gave me the creeps, like I had a strong sense I shouldn't just stuff them in my pocket. Plus, by the next afternoon, I had to pull out to another part of the perimeter, and I never got the chance to come back, kind of kicking myself about that. But at the same time, I just had this gut feeling. On the drive back, I started thinking maybe it was some kind of clandestine operation or a drone dropping advanced fire retardant. But that doesn't add up. Retardant is typically a red slurry or foam, not solid metallic fragments. And we definitely coordinate with aerial firefighting assets. No one said anything about a test or new method. And then there was how that craft maneuvered. Human technology doesn't exactly pivot on a point and shoot off at that speed silently. When I got back into radio range, I tried asking around, indirectly, if anyone else had seen odd lights or heard weird static on the radio. Everyone I talked to just gave me blank stares or joked about me inhaling too much smoke. I get it. Fire camps are full of rumors and tall tales. But this was different, something I still don't have an explanation for. I thought about writing it off. Then that same odd sense of residual static in my head wouldn't go away. It was like my nerves were buzzing for a day or two after. Might have been adrenaline. I really don't know. I also heard from a friend who was scouting in the Tortilla Flat area weeks later. He never mentioned a UFO directly, just said that comms went dead for no reason one evening, and he noticed some kind of silver residue near a ridge. Who knows if it's related, but it made me wonder if this is happening in more pockets than the public realizes. Arizona's full of out-of-the-way canyons and deserts that can hide just about any aerial activity if no one's paying attention.